Okay, I'm just going to wait for you to come in. I think I've started the presentation. I'll just wait a few seconds. Good afternoon. I'm seeing the first few people. Yasmin, hello everybody. I'm in Barcelona, in Spain. It's 9 o'clock at night here. Manuela, nice to see you. Hello. You could, if you want to write in the chat where you are speaking from, I mean where you are connecting from, would be nice. Oh, you're in London. Okay, so it's also in the evening. And Alison is there from Sao Paulo. Miriam, plenty of people from Sao Paulo. Friday afternoon in Brazil, that's right. Okay. And Sergio, hi Sergio, also from Sao Paulo, where I hear it's raining a lot. Okay. Salvador, Araraquara, if I can pronounce that right. Okay. Great. Lots of people from the state of Sao Paulo. Well, thank you all for coming here and participating in this webinar. I want to thank Cambridge, Sergio and Leo and the team for inviting me, and for Disal for organizing the event, of course. And I'm going to be talking today about the personal touch, highlighting the personal touch in digital spaces. And I'll be talking, I imagine a lot of you are now teaching online or hybrid, maybe face-to-face, a combination of the two. In fact, put in the chat just to give me, it would be interesting to know that. In the chat, could you write, in what format you are teaching in at the moment? Is it only face-to-face? Is it only online? Or is it a mixture, a hybrid or blended? So Flavia says face-to-face only. Okay, so I suppose it depends. If you're teaching kids, then it's more likely to be face-to-face. If you're teaching adults, there may be a hybrid or only online. Lots of people are saying online. Okay, so that's, and both ways. So some people, most of the groups online. So I think this will be relevant. It'll be relevant for all of us, but I think it'll be particularly relevant for those of you who are teaching online or remember teaching online during the pandemic, of course. So I'm going to show you, first of all, what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at, first of all, teacher and student well-being. We're going to, this is a topic which was becoming very popular in ELT. The whole notion of well-being and resilience was something that was very much on the agenda before the pandemic. But of course, as a result of the pandemic, it's become even more prevalent in English language teaching. We'll be looking at that. Then we'll be looking at teacher testimonies. And I'll be showing you a couple of testimonies of teachers from Brazil, in fact, because when I was in Brazil last July, I spoke to a few teachers there, and I'm including their testimonies here. Then we're going to look at physical contexts and digital spaces. So we're going to focus on the idea that although the spaces we're working in are online, are digital, they're also physical, and we should try to make that digital space more physical. And then we'll look in the second half of the talk, we'll look at Evolve Digital, and we'll talk about how we can introduce this personal touch, the personalization into an online environment, okay? And then the real students and expert speakers refer to the protagonists in Evolve Digital. And then we'll make some conclusions. Okay, so first of all, let's look at teacher and student well-being. Just before, well, actually, in March or May, I think it's May 2020. Yes, in May 2020, I was invited by Cambridge to do a round table. So it wasn't a webinar, well, it's like a webinar, but with 4 people. So like a mesa redonda, we say in Spanish. I don't know, probably similar in Portuguese. And this was at the stage of the pandemic when we really weren't sure when we were going to return to the physical classroom. and it was like an open forum. So we were the four of us. You can see me there in exactly the same place that I am now, with the same headphones. And we were discussing back then what would happen after the pandemic when we returned to the classroom. And Sarah Mercer and Anne Robinson, who are also on the panel, along with Matt Ellman from Cambridge University Press, some of the things we spoke about were really related to the whole issue of well-being and teacher and student well-being. And Sarah Mercer, in fact, the woman on the top right-hand corner, is very much an expert in that field. And it was interesting to get some the feedback from the roundtable. And here are a couple of comments. So the roundtable was broadcast live on Facebook. And here you can see a couple of comments from people who attended the session. And I think these comments are very revealing. So Jessica, she says, for many of my adult learners, the class has been a form of human contact outside the immediate family. The socio-affective aspect has become hugely important. And that's because I think we were all living through this pandemic. We were living through the trauma of the pandemic. And it meant that Jessica's role was not just that of the teacher, but actually the personal connection grew as a result of that. And I'm sure that some of you maybe can remember that moment and identify with what Jessica says here. And Mark, likewise, Mark says, when all this is over, of course, we didn't realize it was going to carry on. Unfortunately, COVID carried on after this. But, you know, he was hypothesizing by saying it would be good to spend some time with the students when we do finally go back to school, discussing and evaluating this period before any teaching starts. In other words, we need to understand what's been happening and what the effect of this has had on our role as teachers. Before we even begin teaching again, we need to talk about these things. Notice that Jessica here talks about socio-affective aspects. And in reality, that's the same as social and emotional. And you may have heard of social and emotional learning. And it's related very much with well-being, of course. And the pandemic highlighted very much the importance of social and emotional learning. So let's just have a look at, just think, you don't need to do this in the chat, but if you want to, you can. But it's just for you to think about what is social and emotional learning. The important thing to bear in mind is that it's a process that we go through. It's not something, obviously, that you learn overnight. You become an expert in social and emotional learning. It's a process that we need to go through in order to understand and manage, set and achieve positive. Just think for a moment about what these gaps are, what the words in the gaps are. If you want to put the any thoughts in the chat, you could do it, just so that you're thinking about what social and emotional learning is. So it's a process through which we understand and manage emotions, I guess. It's probably easier not to do it in the chat. If we were in face-to-face, it would be quite easy for people to do this, but I'll show you the answers. I'm sorry about the the way that was because I transferred the animation into a PDF, and unfortunately it seems like the has changed the design of the slide. But you can see that hopefully. Yes, Valdomiro said feelings. So understand and imagine feelings or emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. So I think that obviously that's easier said than done, but that is in a sense what social and emotional learning is all about. It's about understanding essentially your emotions and managing them and feeling empathy for others. And as I said, during the pandemic, it seems that a lot of us were able to achieve that, and despite the fact we were in our role as teachers, because of the shared experience. Okay, so I think as a result of that, our conclusions of the roundtable were, as teachers, we require greater flexibility to assume roles of nurturers and carers, excuse me, and not just deliverers of content. And I think that's very important, that we are shown to care for our learners and for our colleagues as well, our teacher colleagues. And of course, there was an awareness of the individual student and their needs. So obviously, one of the things that came up as a result of the pandemic was that there was a digital divide, so that we were very conscious of the fact that many students were unable to connect online because of a poor Wi-Fi or because they didn't have a device through which they could connect. So the digital divide became an educational divide, unfortunately. Returning to well-being, here's a very interesting book if you're interested in sort of looking at the different trends in ELT at the moment. This is Philip Kerr's 30 Trends in ELT, and number 17 is well-being. And he says that many of the ways that well-being can be enhanced is by addressing these issues with colleagues, by sharing and caring. And I like that very much, the idea of sharing and caring. And he then goes on to say, collective responses to both systemic and individual issues are more powerful than teachers trying to work alone. And so I think this is a very, very important message when we look about that, we consider well-being, teacher and student well-being, that clearly it's not something that it's not so effective if you just think about yourself, that me. You know, this often when you look at workshops in well-being, it's lots of how am I going to, self-help, self-improvement. But what he is saying here, and which and the conclusions I think we can draw from the pandemic and how we worked through that, is that it's all about sharing and caring for each other, doing it together, collaborating, and it's that collective effort which is important. Okay, so let's move on then to teacher testimonies. And I think it's important to remember in online or distance learning that the most key element, the most important element in effective and successful online learning is you, the teacher. And this is sometimes hard. Sometimes it's hard to remember that, and we'll be looking at that again, that quotation later. So I'm going to ask you. We're going to do a little poll, okay? And I'm going to hope, fingers crossed, this works. I'm going to ask you 2 questions to get your feedback, and then we're going to see what teacher thought about these questions. So for example, I'm going to ask you the first question. What have we learned about online teaching and learning? Is the experience more or less personal? So let me go to the, I have it in Spanish, it says encuestas, and here you can see, it's the second one. Okay, that doesn't matter. It's are we losing the human touch? So could you, let's see if you can, hopefully this works. I'm not sure. It's the first time I've used this platform, but with online teaching and learning, are we losing the human touch? Yes or no? Let's see if it's working. If not, I shall ask for some technical assistance. Is anybody in Disal there can tell me if it's working okay? Okay. Let me see again. Let's go back to the, I don't think it's working. Okay. Let me try one more time. Of course, these things, we tried in the rehearsal and it worked perfectly, but it doesn't seem to be working now. Okay, now it seems to be working. Okay, good. Sorry about that technical problem. So are we losing the human touch? Yes or no? Okay, 56 people that have responded. Okay, so I think, let's see, a few more people are responding. So I think it's just that 19 of you have replied so far of the 57. Let's just wait a little bit longer. These things sometimes take a bit. It is very close at the moment. We've got somebody saying, I think it depends. Yeah, I think it probably depends as well. But it's certainly very close at the moment between yes and no. It's almost 24% yes and 25% no. It keeps changing all the time. Can you see the scores yourself on the screen? You could just put yes or no in the chat. Oh, you can't see the... Okay, let me see. I'm going to stop it then and share the results. Can you see those results now? Okay, okay. So I don't think everybody replied, but it will just take too long. I think 50% of you nearly replied, and it was neck and neck. So that's a very good, I think that's a very good poll. So 50% of the people who replied said, yes, we are, and 50 said no. All right, let's go back to the presentation, and let's look at a video of a teacher who I met in Sao Paulo. Actually, his name is actually Juan. I don't know if any of you will recognize him. He may even be in the audience. I'll have a look. I don't think so. Anyway, we're going to. I asked him the same question, and we're going to look at his video testimony now. Okay. So hang on a second. Here we go.
Hi everyone, my name is Juan. I'm a teacherpreneur. I opened a company called Lifelong Idiomas and I work with teacher education. I've been a teacher trainer for a few years now, and Ben asked me to answer a couple of questions about teaching online and how personal it can get. I think that when we're teaching, it's very important for us to be able to connect with students. We need to understand how they're feeling and what it is that they're experiencing in our classrooms. And when we're teaching face-to-face, we tend to develop some skills to read students' emotions. So it's easier to read their faces and understand if they're following or if they need some help or if they're feeling a little bit desperate with the task at hand. And when we're teaching online, I think this gets a little bit harder. And because of that, I think we need to get more personal in order to be able to achieve the objectives of our lessons. It's more important to talk about how we're feeling because we need to put it into words in order to actually have access to how students are feeling. I personally have very good experiences online, and I find it even a little bit easier to open up to students, and I find they find it easier to open up to me as well. During the pandemic, unfortunately, I've had many losses in my family and among my circle of friends. And there was this one very special group that there were some students who were going through the same. And we had this beautiful moment when we just, I have the feeling that the lesson wasn't really going anywhere because there were all these feelings going on because of the trauma that we were going through together. And I just decided to open up about the losses I'd had, and so did students. And we had this, I think, liberating moment when we could just talk about our feelings and what we were actually thinking about and what was going on what was going on in our lives. I don't think I would have done that in a face-to-face lesson, because I think in a face-to-face lesson there are other things that I could do to make sure the lesson, the flow of the lesson wasn't making sure there wasn't any obstacle to the flow of the lesson. And when I was teaching online, I think there is this need for us to be a little bit more vulnerable with our students in order to connect better. So yes, I think when we're teaching online, it can be more personal. We should be more personal because we need to find ways to connect with students with all of this technology that is in front of us, you know? And I think that kind of answers the second question as well. So are we losing the human touch? No, I don't think so. I think if anything, we're finding new ways to keep in touch with other human beings. Personally, I think that teaching is about being in touch with humans.
Okay, it's a long clip, but I think he's very articulate, and I think his answers are very. I don't know if any of you can identify with what Juan is saying. Alison is saying that you know him. Okay, so yeah, I met him in Disal last July, and we were in a workshop together, and I just found his experience is so interesting that I videoed him, and he obviously. So I think you can see from what he says there that for him the experience was more personal, and that are we losing the human touch? He says no. In fact, the opposite is true. And notice what he says there about the fact that the online environment, because you're not face to face, he's actually saying that you feel the need to become more personal because the environment is kind of impersonal. And he also uses this expression at the end. He says this need to become a little bit more vulnerable. Now, I know that may not be something that is necessarily desirable with all students, but I think that's also very interesting when we consider the whole issue of well-being and social and emotional learning, the idea of being on the same level as your learners, of showing empathy for them and showing a certain vulnerability in that moment in time, I think was something that clearly just evolved naturally. And I think that it's very moving, his testimony. I don't know if any of you have any comments you'd like to share in the chat, whether you can identify or not with Juan's testimony, but I think it's very, very interesting and kind of paradoxical that he's actually saying it was easier for him to open up with his students online than face to face. So any comments you want to make, feel free, and then we can look at those later as we go through. We'll hopefully have some questions at the end. I've got a couple of, so Alison is saying, yes, I'm pretty much aligned with his ideas. Yeah, I mean, it was a very, very, very heavy time, of course, and it may be the case, in fact, that now that the pandemic is over, things have returned to normal or near normal, and perhaps, just thinking on the top of my head now, that perhaps that intimacy that we were able to forge with our students, then perhaps we should, try and get some of that intimacy back, some of that personal touch back, now that the pandemic is over. In other words, it seems that we needed something like that shared trauma, that experience, for us to become closer to our learners. But in actual fact, a lesson that we can learn from the pandemic perhaps is that we should be more personal with our learners and closer to them anyway. And by that, I don't mean, personal therapy and listening to, your learners' problems and so on. I don't mean that at all. I'm really echoing, I think, what Juan is saying there, that just in the course of a lesson, if something personal crops up, and students feel free to express their emotions, and you can feel, and each and everyone can feel empathy, then that's something that should be encouraged. And possibly we did that more. I think quite probably we did that more during the pandemic. I've got an interesting response from Tamile here. I'm able to create a stronger bond with my students teaching online, and I see better results. So isn't that interesting? And are those adult students or teenagers or kids? I think in the case of adults, there is certainly, or older teenagers, that is something that is many teachers are finding. But okay, children and teenagers. So that's also very interesting that that you say that for children's classes as well. Okay, let's move on. So anyone want to share their experiences, then please add them in the chat. And as I can read them, we can reflect on those later. So obviously, in every big moment like the pandemic, there are positive and negative implications. It was a terrible experience for us, as I said, a shared trauma, but there were many positive implications, and these would be the positive things, I think. Like Juan, some teachers were able to forge stronger connections with their students, and Tamile is saying the same thing there in the chat, and increased empathy and awareness of both learners and teachers as people. And I think we've got Marilia has mentioning that empathy there in the chat as well. And a greater sense of community and collaboration among teachers. So there were a lot of sharing of materials and sharing of ideas, obviously, at the beginning when everything was new, and a greater awareness of well-being. But of course, there were negative implications as well. And it would be ridiculous not to look at those. So the negative ones would be these. The digital divide has very much become an educational divide, and this is still very much the case. Flexibility is expected on the teacher's part, but of course this can upset the life and work balance. You probably remember having to teach online from your kitchen or something in a kind of improvised situation. And obviously, it's not possible to make connections with students if they're not visible. And of course, many teenagers, this was a complaint of many teachers during the pandemic, or it may still be the case now with online classes, that students are not visible. And therefore, it's very difficult to monitor. It's very difficult to know what is happening if students are simply have their cameras disconnected. And there's more TTT as a result, more teacher talking time. But I do like this idea in general, just as a little aside, looking at the positive and negative implications of any situation is something that we should encourage our students. And in the Cambridge Life Competencies, emotional development, which is obviously related with well-being, if you want to take you want to focus on that QR code, take a picture of the QR code, that would take you to a PDF of activities based on the Cambridge Life Competence of emotional development, which is one of the foundational competencies. And this is an activity I really like called finding the silver lining. Do you know that expression in English? Every cloud has a silver lining. I don't know how you say that in Portuguese, but it's like every bad thing has a good consequence as well. And this activity is just an idea just to get students to always consider silver linings in any situation. So when and this is a kind of critical thinking activity as well, getting the students, even if they encounter something problematic, encouraging them to think of at least one good consequence of this situation. So that's called finding the silver lining. And if you're interested in the whole issue of emotional development, as I said, it's this foundational competency in the Cambridge Life Competencies. The emotional development is divided into 3 sections, all of which are very important for social and emotional learning. Obviously, identifying, understanding emotions. That's what we saw before, if you remember, when we looked at the definition of social and emotional learning. Managing your own emotions, very important for teenagers in particular, and empathy and relationship skills. Okay, and there are lots of activities you can download from that PDF. And there you'll find little cards for kids, for teenagers, and for adults based on this competence of emotional development, and lots of activities as well. And research on this issue. So finally, just to finish off this section on teacher testimonies, this is Lucy Crichton, who I think some of you also may know. She's based in Florianopolis. I think we had a teacher from Florianopolis in the people attending here, and I really like her quotation. Very, very positive. Look at all those positive words. She's talking about teaching online and the personal connection she found with her students. She says, "I've learned to be more flexible and open-minded. I felt empowered and more confident and happy to see a lot of the things I've been teaching in my school for the last 18 years are pertinent." And I think this is also very interesting, that a lot of the testimonies of teachers from the pandemic show that although teaching online was very different, a good pedagogy is good pedagogy, and it doesn't matter in what mode of delivery you are in. And she says there, it's the practical living side of the language that students love the most, and that prepares them for challenging times. So problem solving, analyzing, group work with a lot of the active working, collaborating. Again, this also brings a good, a positive classroom environment where students are working together, collaborating, problem solving. This also is very important in terms of social and emotional learning as well. Okay, so let's move on then to the actually this should be the third one, the physical context and digital spaces. So although you're teaching online, language learning is always embodied and embedded in a physical context. You might be able to see behind me a whole load of Cambridge books here. I am in a physical space. And one of the things that's interesting about teaching online, to get a personal touch, is to bring the physical elements of the physical space into the online environment. And I think this quotation is very interesting here. There's a need to understand the complex relationships between learners, their ways of learning and studying, and the environments within which they study, both physical and virtual. So there are ways that you can bring in the physical into the online environment, and this makes the whole thing very, very much more personal. So, for example, you can interact with your students' physical space. You can find something in the physical space. You can integrate real physical objects, and you can incorporate movement as well. So here are just a few sort of just warmers. These are not activities that really have any kind of, they're not at all extended, but they are important, I think, in an online environment to get students thinking about their physical space and making the experience more personal. So the first one would be, show and tell. You could perhaps, go and get an object that has some personal significance. So let's have a look what I've got here. This is something, was not planned, but this is something that I got from Mexico on my travels. And I remember meeting the man, and you can, Tomas Gonzalez Sanchez, you can see his name at the back there. And I met him on the streets of Oaxaca in Mexico. He was actually painting this amazing thing. And I have it here, and it makes me remember that experience. Have you ever done any activities like that, where someone just from their physical space gets something, shows the class, and tells them why that object is meaningful for them? It's an absolutely fantastic activity that you can't do in, of course, the face-to-face classroom. So some of you are saying yes, and it's really great. Yeah, I love doing that too. It always works. And I just had this happen to have this behind me. Photographs, objects, obviously something that's portable that they can show to others. This is something that is really nice to share, especially if it has some kind of emotional resonance, is important for them emotionally. Then again, that's a really nice way to make the experience more personal. Even just listening, sometimes it depends where you are. I imagine if you're in Sao Paulo right now, it might be quite noisy. the traffic. You can actually get students to describe what they can hear at a given moment. They take their headphones off and listen to the street noise. And again, this can help people try to imagine the physical space that the person is in. And even walking to the door, you can even say something like, okay, how far is it from your desk to the nearest window or the nearest door? Count the number of steps, or on what floor are you on, or something. Just get some kind of movement in the classroom as well can again help to make the experience not just more personal but more physical. And I think that these little tasks, they're very little tasks. They're just warmers. They're just something that to kind of get students sort of motivated or engaged. I think they're supporting the personal touch because they boost awareness of the learners as individuals and of the different spaces that we're in. Yeah? We're all in different spaces. And they validate the diversity of the context that people are learning in. So it may be that some students are learning in difficult contexts, which are not very, not very easy to study in. But by showing that, again, you're validating it, and in a way you're kind of empowering the students to show where they are. And it can help us empathize with non-perfect conditions. So perhaps if someone is in their kitchen, well, then, show that they're in their kitchen, find some food they like or something like that. And that again, can be a way for us to be empathetic. And of course, it makes everyone's answers count, because there's no right or wrong answer, is there, to these activities? These are just personalized activities. Okay, so we're just over halfway through, and I want to show you now some examples from Evolve Digital, which is the new course. I don't know if you've heard. Can you just put in the chat box if you've heard of Evolve? I don't know if you've heard of Evolve Digital as well. Just put yes or no in the chat box now, just to give me an idea. So basically, Evolve is a course for young adult and adult learners. And Evolve Digital is a kind of new concept because it has asynchronous self-study element for students to work on their own, but it incorporates your role as well. So although the student is working through the material on their own, they can still send you their productive tasks, their speaking tasks. They can record them and send them to you. Their writing tasks, they can record and send them to you. And it makes for a much more personal experience than just the usual self-study materials. It also incorporates a synchronous element which focuses on speaking. So just to sum up, it's a truly blended course with self-access materials for independent learning and regular synchronous lessons with a teacher, which are based on PowerPoint slides. So the idea is that it's a kind of perfect hybrid, blended, flipped approach where the student does a lot of the self-access material, obviously on their own, and then once they have developed that vocabulary and grammar work, then they are able to do the extended speaking activities. So it's kind of a flipped approach, if you like. To show you how we incorporate the personal touch. So what we're trying to talk about here is how do you make that, if someone is working, on their smartphone, how do you make that a personal experience? I'm just going to show you how we do it. So we have real teachers, and you may recognize this person. She's very well known, Isabella Villas-Boas, and she's very well known in Brazil. I'm sure a lot of you know her. And she is actually one of the real teachers in Evolve Digital. And she appears at the beginning of each unit to greet the students so they're working on their own, but they have a real teacher there on video. And then, of course, they have you as well, giving them feedback on their production as well. So let's look at a little bit of the introductory video from Isabella, just to give you an idea. That's Juan. Here we go.
Welcome back. It's great to see you again. Are you ready for some more learning? So let's get Unit 2 going. So much stuff. That's the name of the unit. Do you have too much stuff? No? Are you sure? Most of us have some stuff that we don't really need or we don't need anymore. It can be
I've certainly
hard to
got too
throw
much
things
stuff.
away. Why do you think that is? In lesson 1, we'll talk about things you've had for a while. We'll learn some new words to talk about possessions, and we'll figure out how to use the present perfect with ever, never, for, and since. In lesson 2, we're going to talk about things you own. What's your favorite possession? For most people these days, it's their phone. My phone has my whole life in it. We're going to learn some words to describe tech features, and we're going to see how to use the present perfect with already and yet. In lesson 3, we're going to look at switching from one topic to another. We'll learn how to introduce a new topic, how to change the subject politely, and how to stay on track. We'll also learn how to use short questions to show you're interested. In lesson 4, we're going to write an online ad for something you want to buy. Do you buy or sell things online? Finally, we're going to review everything you've learned.
Okay, so that gives you an impression, I hope, of, let me just get back to the presentation. There we go. That gives you an impression, I think, of how personal, and she is very personal, isn't she, in the way she introduces herself, and she introduces the unit, but she's also, there she is in her living room, and you can see the things behind her. She's situated in a physical space. She's a real person. She's a real teacher. And I think this is what we're trying to aim for, that we can make this online environment more personal, in fact. And I think this is a very sort of human way of introducing even though the student is then going to go on and do that material themselves. And here's an example of one of the speaking tasks in the asynchronous component. So in the self-study component, the students have a lot of scaffolding. They have a lot of support there to be able to record, to prepare them for the speaking task. They need time, they need support, they need scaffolding, and that's all there on the left-hand side. And then, of course, you can see the model. So all the students always have a model that they can listen to, and then when they're ready, then they can record themselves, and they can record it as many times as they want, and then they can send that to you, and you can feedback on that. So that would be an example of a speaking task in the asynchronous element. In this case, it's the speaking task is experiences in your life. So which of these different experiences have you done? And it says to speak for 2 minutes on this topic and include this vocabulary. So this comes at the end of a unit that's been looking at that, and they're recycling grammar and vocabulary there. And this would be an example of an extended speaking task in the synchronous element. So there's an asynchronous element, and then there's a synchronous element, which is, of course, you would be teaching face-to-face. And the students will already have done the online work. So it's a blended concept, if you see what I mean. And here the students have a more complicated, it's a higher level speaking task where students have to give advice about different apps that they can use for work and study. So they choose an app, they discuss it, and they decide on the apps they want to talk about, and they present that to the class. So what makes Evolve Digital personal, I think, is that the synchronous lessons have a real teacher. As we saw, Isabella. Isabella is just one of the teachers. There are many other teachers, both native and non-native speakers with different accents and different approaches. And so face-to-face or online, and this teacher then grades speaking and writing tasks from the synchronous lesson. So it's a kind of bridge between the two parts. So there's a synchronous lesson with a real teacher, and there's the asynchronous lesson with a teacher guide, who in this case is Isabella. We got some good feedback there from Raquel, who's talking about Evolve being, oh, you're teaching athletes in the Paralympic Committee. Okay, and the asynchronous tasks are clear and particularly like the gradation of the content. Thank you for the feedback, Raquel, there. And there are voices, faces, stories, people, and not just gap fills. So sometimes we just think of, the activities we use on our phone as just being mechanical gap fill activities, but there are lots of people, whether they are the teachers, as we saw, like Isabella in the asynchronous part, or there are documentaries, dramas, vox pops, video material that you'll find as well. And the vox pops from New York, we have interviews with people in Central Park, people talking about their experiences. Again, this is very much, again, related with the whole issue of empathy and getting students. So these are sort of depending on the level of the students who are doing the course, these people will be at a similar level or a little bit above them. And coming on to that then is the whole issue of the real student and the expert speakers. So one of the things that's really important in Evolve in general, the digital part and also the face-to-face part, is that there are these real students. Now, these students, as I said, have a similar level to the level of the students of the material. So if it's a B2 level or A2 level, then the students will be more or less at that level. And they come from different parts of the world, many from Latin America, but also from Asia and from Europe. And these change depending on the level of Evolve that you are working with. And what's interesting about these are that they represent sympathetic role models. So the idea here is that they're not like me, a native speaker with a perfect British accent. That in reality is rather inaccessible for many learners. These are students themselves, and the students, your students, when they're looking at these, probably will empathize with them because of that. And they're incorporated into every unit of Evolve, both whether it's the face-to-face print format or whether it's the online asynchronous format. The students can watch these real student videos as they go through the material. And so you can see here, talking about food, what's a famous soup in your country, where and when do people usually eat? And then we listen to Alessandra talking about her favorite dish in her culture and her country. And so again, this is the personal touch, getting students to listen and watch other people who are talking about, we would imagine, experiences which could be similar to theirs. So that's why I say accessible and sympathetic role models. So these real students appear in levels 1 to 4 of Evolve. In levels 5 and 6, the high levels, that's B2 and C1, we have expert speakers. And these are speakers, these are different. These are people who've been born outside the US, but live now in New York. Most of these speakers were videoed in New York. And the idea here for the higher levels is that these expert speakers represent what students would like to attain, because their level is very, very high. Just to give you an example, let's have a look at Eric. He's originally from Ecuador, Eric Rodriguez. He's a graphic designer living in New York. And we're just going to show you a video of his to give you an idea of a very high proficiency. And he's talking about distraction at work, something I think we can all relate to, okay? What kinds of things distract you from your work? Sorry about that. Okay.
I am easily distracted at work. I usually go into this tunnel of cat videos a lot. I'm obsessed with that. I think that's it.
Cat videos, that's interesting.
Is my boss going to see this? Well, hopefully no. So what I would do is I would go on the internet and not research whatever it is I'm supposed to be researching. I would just go on, the newsletters or, pop culture stuff just to read about stuff. Or if I'm trying to figure out like random questions like why is the sky blue, it will pop up in my head. Now I would have to Google it or, go through like all these things, random trivia that I need to know for whatever reason. Hopefully my boss is seeing this part of the video. What I've learned that helps me is just do like quicker tasks, like completing point A and point B to get to point C. So it's like little tiny milestones to accomplish something. So there's not as like, you don't see the finish line. You don't focus on the finish line. You just focus on like the one step at a time situation.
I think that's good advice. If you're easily distracted, just do, set yourself little milestones, one step at a time. Some lovely, you can see how proficient he is. And for the higher levels of Evolve, we've chosen these very proficient speakers to act as kind of positive role models for the learners. And again, I chose that particular video because it's something I think that we can all relate to, that we can all empathize with. This idea of being distracted and setting yourself goals is something we all need now in the online environment in which we're working. Okay, so let's just go back to the presentation. If I can find it. Hang on a moment. There we go. So just want to finish then. That's looking at Evolve Digital and how we try to incorporate the personal touch into material, which a lot of which is online, and how it's possible to do that with real teachers introducing the material, with videos of real students who act as role models and who your learners can empathize with, and of course with your role as the teacher being able to feedback and to send personalized feedback to your students doing the written and spoken work. So this is kind of how we've approached understanding that particularly young adult and adult learners are going to want to work within an online environment. We've really tried to set ourselves the challenge of making that as personal as possible. And this relates, as you might remember, to what we were looking at the beginning of this session, where we were seeing that online learning can be more personal, and that what we've got to try to avoid is to not lose the human touch. And you might remember what Juan was talking about with reference to that. So some conclusions then, and then maybe we can just get a few questions, just 5 minutes of questions. So I think digital or online or whatever you want to call it can be more personal. It's all about the people and not the tech. I think that's very important, and it's very important to remember that it's who you are with your learners, being yourself and letting them be themselves. That's important, even though they are all connected in different parts of the world, different parts of Brazil or whatever. There are ways that we can make the experience more personal. Remember, the physical context, for example, is a way to do that. And what have we learned about online teaching and learning? Well, we can still teach as we've always taught. Remember what Lucy was saying, that many of the things that she did, and those I imagine are very personal, very engaging, dynamic activities for the face-to-face classroom with kids. These are still possible to do in the online environment. the personal touch will always engage and motivate. I think that is, personalized approach, personalization in general, is always going to engage and motivate your learners. And for me, the key to successful learning, online or not, is always going to be your presence, the presence of the teacher and the quality of their teaching. And so with a course like Evolve Digital, this is something we really want to highlight. We want to show that, students are busy people. They need an online component that they can work through themselves, but then they need you as well to be there, to give them feedback. And then in the synchronous part, in the face-to-face part, that's where the best speaking, of course, is done. And that is what we would recommend. The whole thing together would be the perfect package for students today. And I'm going to finish with a quotation. You might remember Philip Kerr in his book on the 30 trends in ELT. He was looking at well-being. We saw that at the beginning of the quotation of his. And he spoke about caring and sharing. Sharing is caring. And this is a quotation from a teacher in Hungary that I particularly like. And I'm going to read it to you because I think it's very, very moving and very appropriate, really, for what we've been looking at this evening or this afternoon. And she says this, Silla, she says, looking back at these few months and all the challenges and new practices I wanted or had to implement, I can identify one single phrase that strongly resonates with this whole period. Sharing is caring. The sharing attitude of my colleagues and students became the driving force for me. All these gestures of sharing facilitated the learning of my students, my colleagues, and myself, and ensured the humanity of the otherwise impersonal environment of online education. I think she says that, she sums it up really beautifully. And as I said, I think a little while ago, that is a testimony from working during the pandemic. But I think we need to try and get that back now. We need to recover that humanity now that we are back to normal, and that positive connection that we were able to make with our colleagues, with our students. I think we can, if we can try and regain that now, then that would be the best lesson that we can possibly have learned from this whole experience. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for listening and watching me this afternoon. And I only got a couple of minutes left, but if anyone has any burning question they'd like to ask, then feel free to ask me now, or I don't know if anybody from Disal wants to come in and share anything. I don't know if we have time, really. I'll give you my, I should put in the chat my email. I'm going to put that in now. So feel free to write to me, because it may be that you need some time to reflect, and there you go. Okay, so it's very simple. Ben at bengolstein.es. If you want to send me any feedback, please do. And still got a couple of minutes if anybody has a burning question. Some people from outside Brazil, is everyone in Brazil here? Just wondering. How does Evolve Digital work? Hang on a second. I'm in the US. Yeah. Okay. Of course. Yes, we had Portugal. Somebody in London. That's right. Argentina. Yeah. Good. So it's truly international. Fantastic. There is one question here. Let me see if I can find it. Some colleagues are worried about how to manage breakout rooms and use different technologies platforms, and the most technological piece of the process. Yeah, that That was a statement from Sergio, not a question. But I totally agree with that. Yeah, we spend so much time worrying about the mechanics, and of course, obviously at the beginning we had to learn. It was all new, and we had to learn how to sort out all those logistical questions. But I think it boils down to you to make it work. And of course, we need to really congratulate ourselves from what we did and what we learned together. And that was a collaborative process, a collective effort. But I think sometimes with all of the focusing on the tech, we often forget about your role and how important you are. So thanks for that comment, Sergio. I'm trying to work out where the questions are. Let's have a look. I don't know if I can see any. How does Evolve Digital work teachers with Oh, yes. So this is Tiago. You can definitely do it with private students or few students. In fact, it's very well suited for that. Remember that the asynchronous component is just for self-study. So this would be really, really appropriate for small groups or for one-to-one classes. And then the synchronous element, which are PowerPoint slides. Again, you can just go through those with a laptop computer with your class. And although some of the activities require group speaking, a lot of the activities are you can do together on a one-to-one basis or with very, very small groups. So it would be totally appropriate for use with small groups or one-to-one. No problem at all. I'm just going through if I can see any other questions. If there are anything else that occurs to you, I'm sure you probably get to go back to your afternoons or evenings or wherever. Then please feel free, again, ben@bengolstein.es. Write to me, and I'll be very happy to answer any of your questions. So thanks very much for attending, as I said. And if you're interested in Evolve and Evolve Digital, then get in touch with the Cambridge people, the Cambridge team, wherever you are in the world, and I'm sure they will provide you with all the information you need. So thanks very much again, and have a great rest of your Friday. I'm going to go and have dinner, and have a great weekend. And I look forward to seeing you soon, either face to face or online. But remember to keep it personal. Thanks very much, and thanks again for being with us this evening. Bye-bye.